All right, welcome back, everyone. If I could ask you to have your attention, please go ahead and take your seats. For those of you in the room and those of you joining us online, welcome back. Our next session is on ensuring the well-being of international students. Our moderator for today, for this session, is Jessica Higgs, Director of Health Service, Family Medicine, and Sports Medicine at Bradley University. Please join me in welcoming this panel.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion of the day titled Ensuring the Well-Being of International Students. As Devin said, my name is Jessica Higgs, and I have been the Director of Health Services at Bradley University and team physician for 10 years, and have spent the last 4 years as a member at large on the board of directors for the ACHA. Joining us on our panel today is Dr. Wendy Richards, is the Chief Medical Officer of Aetna Student Health. During the past 20 years, Dr. Richards has held physician executive positions in healthcare systems and has served in leadership roles for several large national healthcare payer organizations. In her current role with Aetna Student Health, Dr. Richards is responsible for ensuring that the products, tools, and practices of Aetna Student Health meet the clinical needs of colleges, universities, and students. Dr. Richards received a Doctor of Medicine degree from the University of Chicago and a Master's of Business Administration degree from Benedictine University. She is certified by the American Board of Family Medicine and is designated a Fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians. Dr. Richards is also certified at the National Committee of Quality Assurance. She is on the adjunct faculty of DePaul University, Chicago, where she developed and taught courses in healthcare administration and health information technology and analytics. Julie Baer is a research specialist in the IIE Center of Academic Mobility Research and Impact at the Institution of International Education, otherwise known as IIE, where she conducts research on the Open Doors Project, a large-scale annual survey of international educational exchange in the United States. Her experience includes analyzing trends in the international academic mobility in U.S. higher education across sectors and using geospatial analysis to highlight trends in the educational access. She holds a Master's in Education and International Education Policy from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a bachelor's degree from Centre College. And then we had a last-minute substitution. Dr. Mike Huey is the immediate past president of the American College Health Association. He is an associate professor of family and preventative medicine at the Emory University School of Medicine and a team physician for the Emory Eagle Athletics. Michael recently retired as the Assistant Vice President and Executive Director of Emory University Student Health Services and is a former Student Health Director at the University of Florida and California State University, Bakersfield. In 2015-16, he was an Ebola clinical consultant with CDC and served as the CDC Sierra Leone Ebola response as an infection prevention specialist in the summer of 2015. He has been a AAAHC College Health Surveyor since 2005. So we'll go ahead and get started with these three great panelists. And our first question is to Julie. To start, what is happening at the moment with international education in the United States? Is enrollment increasing or decreasing? And where are the students coming from? Have any recent events impacted international student enrollment and completion?
Okay. Great. There's a lot of questions in there. So as she mentioned, my name is Julie Baer, and I work for the Institute of International Education. Just by a quick show of hands, how many people in the room are familiar with IIE or have heard of IIE? Okay, a couple. Great. So for those of you who aren't familiar with IIE, we were founded as a nonprofit back in 1919, and we work with partners across the globe to design and manage scholarships, study abroad, leadership development programs. But in addition to this, we conduct a lot of research on trends in internationalization in higher education, primarily through our Open Doors research. And we've been conducting this research pretty much since our founding, so we almost have 100 years of data on international students coming to the United States. And we currently conduct this report each year with the support of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. So what is happening in the United States right now with international students? Our most recent data is from the 2016-17 academic year, so it is a little bit old at this point. We have our newest data coming out in just about a month. But what we had found in our most recent trends is that for the second year in a row, we have just over 1 million international students in the United States, 1.08 million to be a little bit more precise. Now, that is a record high for international students, and in 2016-17, that was an increase of about 3% nationally. Now, while we have seen the overall enrollments increase, I do want to note that what was particularly notable in 2016-17 is that we did see a decline in new international student enrollments for the first time since we began tracking this data about 12 years ago. And we saw about a 3% decline in these new students. And those are students who are enrolled at a U.S. institution for the first time in fall of 2016. And I would expect, based off of a snapshot survey that we did last fall, that trend will continue and that we will continue to see declines in new enrollments when we do release the data in November for the 2017-18 academic year. Now, these shifts in new enrollments are largely a factor of multiple things occurring at the same time. We've had changes in large governmental scholarship programs where the governments of foreign countries were providing scholarships for international students to come to the United States. There's been growing competition internationally to attract international students. We've also seen the cost of higher education increase. That's across the board, U.S. students, but also for international students. It's very expensive to come and study here in the United States, as well as the current social and political climate here in the United States. So I think your other question was just more generally just about international students. Where are they coming from? We do see international students coming from across the four corners of the globe to the United States. Over 200 countries send international students here. By and large, though, there are several leading places of origin for these international students. The top four are China, India, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia, with China and India being by far the largest senders of international students to the United States. About 50% of all international students are coming from these two countries alone. And so when we look at that, that means that there are about 350,000 international students from China and over 186,000 international students from India. And they do come across the board to every state in the United States. California, New York, and Texas are the largest host states. Not too surprising, they all have very large higher education systems and have the capacity to have a lot of international students. I have a lot more statistics and happy to answer questions about the landscape, but I'll turn it back over for now.
Wendy and Mike, any additions?
No, I have no data. I was just accosted in the hallway. I will say that when you say that you'll sub on a panel, it's probably a good idea to ask who you're subbing for before you commit. So I said yes, Stephanie Hannenberg, our president, yes, I'll be on the panel. I'll help out Stephanie, I told you I would. Who am I subbing for? Carlo Ciotoli of NYU, and my face just dropped, So Carlo, if you're watching this on tape delay, I'm going to do my best to represent you here today. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay. I guess I just had a question for Julie. So it sounds like you have wonderful data and longitudinal study. So is this publicly available to us?
Oh yes, it definitely is. If you just Google IIE and open doors, it should be hopefully the first thing that comes up. You can add in international students. We have a lot of data tables available, everything from all the places of origin in the world. We have all that information broken out by academic levels, how they're funding their studies here. For example, about 60% of all international students pay their own way. They're primarily funded through their own personal and family funding. So a whole wide range of statistics, as well as a publication that has even further detail.
Thank you.
I think at many of our universities, we make the assumption on international students that they're going to come in and that they'll be full pay. And so, they're great to add to the student body because we increase the bottom line. But we find at our place, and particularly, and this is anecdotal, but it sounds like the data supports it, that a large percentage of our international students do not come from wealthy families. And many of them, there's a whole group of people supporting their ability to come to the United States to study. And so anything that chips away at their financial security really increases their stress. It's not that they, just like it would for an American student, they can't fall back on unlimited resources. And so that's something that we certainly see.
So Mike, of all the changes the last 2 years regarding immigration have been well documented, how are these changes impacting the well-being and academic success of international students?
I think we have at our university the exact demographics of the national pool. Our three main countries are China, India, and South Korea, and it's by a huge percentage. I think it exceeds 60% on our campus, maybe significantly so. So we don't, there are some campuses, Jessica said I'm a AAAHC surveyor, and when I go to campuses and we talk about their international students, I've been to campuses where virtually all of their students are from the Middle East. You know, it's a smaller campus, they've built a relationship with a country or countries, and now in those places where there's increasing pressure on the ability to immigrate and travel to the United States, the stress on those students has ratcheted up incredibly, or they just don't come back. We have found that we had a small but real percentage of our students not go home. So they just, maybe they weren't in a restricted class at that time, but they weren't sure where things were going. And so rather than take a chance and go home over a semester break or over the summer, they just made the decision to remain in the United States. That created some issues for them in terms of finding places to stay, particularly if they were living in our residence halls. And so the university needed to figure out ways to go out to members of the faculty and staff and say, would you be willing to be a host family for an international student over the semester and New Year break, or would you be willing to do that for the summer? I think that the overall confidence level of our students that they're going to be able to complete their academic career at our university and go out with something very valuable has been significantly eroded. And so a domestic student might say, well, I'll go to the counseling center and talk this through, or I'll go to a health coach and talk this through. But as we all know, many of our international students aren't comfortable in those settings, and it's not even culturally acceptable in some of our countries for students to seek mental health care. So I think that has had an impact. I don't want to take it back completely to insurance, but we've seen impacts. Our international students, we still have a hard waiver, and the plans still have to meet our criteria, but we see students seeking these short-term plans and high deductible plans. They're not Americans, so they don't have to necessarily, an insurance plan that they are choosing may not have to necessarily meet requirements of an American insurance plan. And so we have seen more incidences in our international students of them having limited coverage. So I think those are the things. On our campus, our enrollment for international students have been going up and up and up and up every year over the 17 years that I was there, and then it flattened out in the last 2 years. So Emory University in Atlanta currently is at 18%, and it's sitting there. And so that's a change for us, because the internationalization of the campus really was a forward-moving train for a long, long time.
Thanks, Mike. Julie, if these students are choosing to go somewhere else internationally, where are they going to? And if the U.S. reverses certain courses on policy, do you think they'll come back?
So let's see, when we look at the global marketplace for international students, in 2017, there were about 4.6 million international globally mobile students. So when you look at that proportion who are coming to the United States, almost about 24% of all international students who are going outside of their country to study are coming to the United States. So it does remain, one of the premier sources to come and study. The next largest host is the United Kingdom, where about 11% of international students choose to study, and then that's followed by China, Australia, France, and Canada. Now, when we have another source of data that's called Project Atlas that does look at this in a global perspective. In 2017, some of the areas that had continued to see pretty robust growth continue to be China, Australia, and Canada. And I would say that as more countries look to become active hosts of international students, they're implementing national strategies really designed to not only attract international students, but also to retain them as trained graduates. The competition for these students is really, I would say, only going to intensify going forward. But as I mentioned before, there are a whole host of issues around an international student's decision to either come here or go to another country. When we did look at that flattening of growth or where there were declines in the past year, some of the largest declines were because of changes in large governmental scholarship programs. So for instance, we saw about a 30% decline in students coming from Brazil because there was an ending of a program called the Brazilian Scientific Mobility Program, where the Brazilian government had sent students to the United States. Well, when that ended, we saw a decline due to that, as well as there continues to be a very large program with Saudi Arabia where they're sending international students to the United States, but they've implemented some changes over the past couple of years. So there are many, many factors that are contributing to the flattening of growth in the United States. But I do want to emphasize some of the kind of positive aspects. Despite all of these factors, I would say one thing is that what we've seen is that there is a wide range of opportunities here in the United States. International students want to go to all the diverse programs that we offer here in the U.S. We have a high quality of education, and then there's really the support services that we offer here in the United States, which I think really speaks to the panel that we have here today and speaking about how we can support international students holistically, not only with their visas, but also with the well-being of an international student. I know we did a snapshot survey last year, and we had asked about what are institutions doing to welcome international students or to make sure that their voices are heard on campus. And what we found is that many colleges and universities are publicly advocating for international students. They're releasing social media campaigns such as the hashtag #YouAreWelcomeHere, really designed to show these international students that they're welcome on campus here. As well as over half of the institutions said that they were providing counseling services specifically to international students concerned about the U.S. social and political climate. So there's a lot going on here within the United States to ensure that international students still want to come here and study.
Well, Julie, that's a terrific segue into our next question, which is, Mike, how can institutions and organizations help these students navigate an increasingly complicated array of issues lying before them?
Well, I'm going to focus, I think, on what we can do on the health and well-being service sides of our universities. And our international students, our new students, are making decisions about what they're going to do about healthcare and what sort of services they're going to access and what's available to them. They're making these decisions generally before they've arrived on campus. And so I think that whatever we can do to provide them with materials and instructions that help them to make some of these decisions about insurance or about, are they going to get certain vaccinations before they arrive, or are we going to vaccinate them when they get here? Those things I think can be very helpful. There are many schools that are translating their materials into their major languages, and I think that's it's not only helpful in terms of the education of this group of students from that country or that part of the world, but it's a real sign of welcome that you are going to go to this degree of work to put together materials that they can understand and that will resonate with them. We talk a lot about the diversity on our campus and staff diversity at our services. I do think that this is an area where we've got, for many of our international students, a feeling of stigma, primarily about seeking mental health services, but not exclusively. And so the more we can do to give our students a diversity of staffing opportunities, I think the better. And let's face it, we're not going to be able to have someone from each country of the 50 most common countries that come to our campus, but just someone who is welcoming to them and makes an effort and does outreach, and if ideally even someone who is an international student once themselves, can be very, very very helpful, I think, in terms of making our students feel welcome. We have found something that we didn't expect to see. I think probably a lot of you have opened up your patient portal on your electronic health record and allow students to message back and forth to you. And most of us were afraid of doing it before we did it, and we thought that the whole world was going to cave in on us and that we wouldn't be able to get our jobs done. And we figured out how to make it work, I think, in most of our health centers, and wouldn't go back. We love the patient portal. We love students being able to send us information. But we found a very interesting differential in the utilization of the portal between domestic students and international students. And international students were using the portal differentially more. And we tried to think about what could that be about, and we're convinced that many students are more comfortable communicating and writing in English than they are in speaking English. And when you're sending a message, and it's true for us, writing in English ourselves, if you don't know the definition of a word, you can look it up. That's not something you can do when you're sitting in front of somebody. So we'll get a lot of questions from international students about health and about requirements and how does the insurance plan work and what's with all these immunizations I have to have. We really differentially more from our international students. And we think that's a way that we have been able to try to build relationships with them and let them get an idea of what we have to offer. Many of our international students don't have access to a full array of immunizations in their countries, and so if they're on an insurance plan that does give them significant coverage for vaccines across the whole profile, then making available and encouraging and marketing vaccines like the HPV vaccine to international students who many of them do not have access in their countries, brings them in to your service and helps to build that initial relationship and that personal relationship with your health and counseling and health promotion people. And finally, one that I see a lot when I go to other campuses and has been a big deal for us on our campus in Atlanta is the use of pronunciation guides on students' names. Many of you on your EHR, there's a place that you can put in some information, and we use it for pronouns, right? And we use it for preferred name. There's lots of things we can put in that help us to be maximally welcoming to a student, understanding what their identity is. We have found that putting the pronunciation of an international student's first name in that field, so it's right up there on the top of every one of your EHR screens, and when you walk into that room, regardless of what part of the health and well-being system you are, and you pronounce their name spot on correctly, the first time that you say hello, you just get this smile and relationship off and running. So if that's not something you're doing, I think that can be a way that that your institution can reach out, because again, it's about relationships, and so you got to build that relationship with the student and build that trust with the student before they're going to want you to navigate their way through the system. We do a lot of ombuds work also for our international students. I think particularly in the insurance field where international students don't know that if they get charged for something that they were told was covered by the insurance, they don't know to complain. They just go, oh, I guess I just didn't understand. Domestic students will be all over you saying, what do you mean? We were told there was 100% coverage for immunization, and this is covered at 50%, and what's this about? International students don't know. And so making sure that during orientations and during materials that you provide to them, information on your website, information on your portal that says, if you get a bill that you don't understand or that does not seem correct to you, whether it is from us or from another part of the American healthcare system, call us or come in and talk to this person. And you all have that person. You know, it's for most of us, it's an insurance office of one or even a part of one, but someone who's willing to take on that ombuds role and contact the other provider or the hospital or the emergency department or your insurance company and advocate for your student, a student that maybe doesn't understand what an emergency department is and now doesn't know why they thought they were just going in to be seen and it cost them $10,000. And so trying to figure out how to help an international student not be wrecked and completely disillusioned by those sorts of interactions with the healthcare system, I think, is another role that we can play.
And I would chime in, we started the day talking about resiliency, and obviously our international students need resiliency as much as our domestic students. And we talked about that a large number of students come from certain countries. I would say on our campus, 85% of our international students are from India. But we do have those students that come from other countries that don't have a network. You know, the students from India, they sort of all kind of know, and they live in the same houses, and they pass down information to each other, not always correct information, but information. Whereas a student, I know last year we had a student from a country in Africa, and he had no one. I mean, I still never quite understood how he found Bradley, and he's back this year and he's great, but you know, we really, you know, helped him. He came over, he was dehydrated because he didn't like the food and he wasn't eating, and we gave him a goodie bag and he thought it was the most amazing thing ever, and we helped connect him to a couple other campus offices, and he started to thrive that way. But I think if he had really isolated himself, that would be an issue. And so paying attention to, oh, you're from a country I don't hear of very often, you know, what are you doing, how are you connected, can really benefit those students as well.
We're seeing increasing utilization of case managers on our campuses, and those of you and us who added a case manager very quickly can't understand how you ever lived without a case manager, and how could you possibly have even had a program without a case manager. And so you start with one case manager and then you have 3 case managers in 2 years. So if you haven't started that cascade, it could very well happen to you, but I will tell you that the ability of someone who has sophistication about medical and mental health issues and access to resources issues beyond just like an insurance field can be extraordinarily valuable for your international students. The other thing that we talked about for a long time on our campus is that international students were subsidizing the health care of domestic students, because the international students on our student insurance plan weren't using the insurance plan because they didn't understand what they were supposed to do, and it was intimidating. And so the domestic students might have a loss ratio, meaning, you know, how much you spent versus what your premiums were. The domestic students, their loss ratio might have been 110%. And we know, well, we're not aiming for 110%. That's losing money, you know. We're aiming for 85% or whatever your target loss ratio is. And the international students' loss ratio would be 20%. And so they were who was responsible for bringing the loss ratio down to 75%. And they weren't using the plan. And in terms of you know, equity and trying to provide a fair, socially just environment of learning for all of our students, we decided that we needed to take that on and that we needed to make every effort we could to get in front of international students and explain to them how to use the plan. and help them to use the plan. And what we experienced was that, it was 20% loss ratio, then it was 35, then it was 45, then it was 57, and so it has crept up and crept up and crept up. And we consider that, even though it isn't necessarily in the best interest of the plan to be spending more of the premium dollars, it's absolutely in the best interest of the individual students, of the collective international students, and of the overall health care of the campus.
So Wendy, beyond current events, what issues do international students face when it comes to their health and well-being, and how do cultural issues and language barriers impact their wellness and certain issues like access to resources?
Well, I think we've alluded to some of the points that I have here. It's a new environment. For some, it may be the very first time they've been in the U.S. for any length of time. Oftentimes, what we're finding out from our case managers within our plan is that many of them are here without family, or maybe some distant relatives that are here in the U.S., but not primary close relatives that they can lean on. Especially in their first year, they're still developing friendships on campus and with fellow students. So, and this we've noticed, just looking across, the students that have worked with our case managers, this can be particularly unsettling when they end up having an acute medical issue. And that's generally when we start working with them, then they reach out to us, or if they are hospitalized, the facility, may reach out to us and say, as far as discharge planning, want to talk about the insurance benefits. And oftentimes our case managers are able to engage with that student at that time, prior to them leaving the hospital or the facility. And really help them walk through the benefits and help them, plan any kind of post-discharge needs that they have. Also, too, lots of differences in the practice of medicine, between here and their home country. The healthcare infrastructure, we all, trying to navigate that myself, and I'm a lifelong citizen of the United States, and I've worked for insurance companies for a number of years. So, despite all of our best efforts to kind of simplify things and kind of bring the healthcare system, a little bit more, have a continuity of care there, I think it can still be confusing, and especially for people who, are not used to this system. Resulting in underutilization, really, of preventive care or proactive care. So we've had a number of situations where, a student becomes acutely ill, and something's been percolating over time, and they just either didn't know that they should outreach, or, they didn't feel it was really right to outreach. They weren't sure what to do. And so, again, I think all of this kind of leading into avoidable situations. The other thing about language, too, oftentimes there is a lack of providers in the area that speak their native language. And so depending on, where they are with their facility with English, it's going to be difficult. If I put myself in their place and I was in their home country and trying to seek medical care or, getting help for something, I think it can be very challenging for them. And I think beyond the language, it's really understanding their cultural background. So, Mike, talked about, sometimes in certain cultures, it's really not acceptable, especially for mental health issues, to seek care or to ask for help. And, we've certainly seen that. I think, those will be my primary points in terms of some of the things that they're struggling with, especially when they're seeking health care.
And equally for providers as well, I know that often our students will come with health forms from their home country, and we can't decipher what it says. And they try and decipher it for us, but sometimes they don't know the words either in terms of what we're looking for. And so when they may be in compliance, we can't tell. And so there's a lot of stress and anxiety that wouldn't normally happen with another student if the records were in English. Also, many of our Indian students come over with a care package that was packed that has medication in it. Of course, the medication's all labeled, but not that I can read it. And so when I'm making recommendations of over-the-counter medicine they should go buy, they're asking me, well, do I already have it in my care package? And we spend a lot of time on the computer trying to figure out, is that equivalent? What is that? Go with. So, those different language barriers and cultural barriers can become an issue on both sides as we try and navigate together what's going on.
With our international students, frequently we're not the first provider that they have seen for this problem. And if you're in a large metropolitan area, there are traditional providers from many of your key countries, certainly from China. There'll be traditional providers, and the student will come in and they'll show us something that they're taking or an herb that they're taking. We'll do the Dr. Google search or Google Translate, try to figure out what things are. But I think that one way to squash a relationship permanently is to look like you disapprove. There's a lot of different ways that people seek healthcare throughout the world, and we learn a lot from our students. And so I think that saying, well, it looks like we've got improvements in this area so far, but let's see if we might try this now. And if you can, make sure there's no interactions if somebody's continuing something, and it is time consuming. But I think that you can end a relationship with someone who's going to be on your campus for 4 years by having them feel criticized for what they have done to provide their own care or care that is acceptable in their country.
So Wendy, what changes should be made to assist these students with their well-being?
Well, as I was kind of thinking about this question, if we look across the health and wellness spectrum, we've heard a lot a lot of great things over the past 2 days about, what is well-being and how do we define it. And, I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of the Duke study. So I'm going to have that bookmarked as well as your website for IIE, because I think it's just amazing information that we can have and review and use for programming. But I would love to know what people think about what does well-being mean for the international student? Because, again, we talked about, cultural and linguistic, differences, but, how does the international student body consider? What do they think about well-being, and what is that? And so, maybe that's already been defined and sort of, drilled into to really understand that more. But I would say that would be really, really helpful in understanding what kind of changes can we make for them to help them, number one, feel more welcome, but also, get them the health care that they need and help them access what they need to access. I think, again, with our case managers, we make sure that, they're really attuned to what the students' needs are, and they're not necessarily going to be the same as, a number of the students that they do work with. And so, are they, able to access some of the sort of self-decision-making tools that, the U.S. domestic students can access. So we can't just say, okay, well, here you go, here's a packet of information, from Aetna Student Health that will help you. I mean, sometimes that really has to be navigated and worked through with them. And I think there are gaps in the community provider network. So just thinking about students who may feel much more comfortable with a provider that is of their culture and speaks their language. How do we close some of those gaps so that, again, the students are seeking the care and getting the access to the care that they need. In our case, what we do is we oftentimes will get requests from our schools that will say, we need a provider that is of Chinese origin and speaks Mandarin, and we don't see any in the Aetna network because we have a broad network. For Aetna Student Health, we use the general Aetna network, which is pretty broad. And they'll say, but we know of a couple of providers in our area, but they're not in your network. Is there something you can do to maybe approach them? And the schools will come to us with this, and so then we put our network team to work, and they can at least approach those providers and determine whether or not they have an interest, and then of course would have to go through the whole credentialing process and such. So I think that still is, and I'd love to hear from others, kind of what you're finding in that area. And I think the only other thing that I would add here is, we all have access to the typical language lines, but also the out-of-country or country-to-country transport in the case of situation of a medical emergency, an acute medical situation where maybe the student's family, the parent or parents need to come to the United States and they need assistance with that. Or vice versa, the student's going to be going home to receive their medical care. And so, we work with the school as well as the student and their family. We have a program that's set up that can help facilitate that when it's needed. And it makes such a difference because, in times of, great stress, we've all been in times of stress with family member or friend, and, the last thing you want to do is figure out how am I going to get thousands of miles away to get to my son or daughter. So we can facilitate that as well.
So I have one more question, but I know Devin said we have a couple from the audience, so I'll go ahead and let Devin do those.
All right. First question is, what are some ways that staff and faculty can be more culturally competent when interacting with international students in different capacities?
Silence.
All right. Well, I can get this started. I think that there are a couple of things that you mentioned already in terms of being able to say a student's name correctly and being aware of some of the different intercultural issues particular to the countries where you may have a lot of international students. And there are different learning techniques oftentimes that are associated with that. Not every student learns in the same way in their given country before coming to the United States as well. So there's a whole host of different things that faculty and staff can do. And I think oftentimes international student offices are very aware of these and will often do trainings as well.
Yeah, I think that we have a lot more expertise in this area than we give ourselves credit for. And so in our counseling center, every year they've got sessions on cultural sensitivity, and I did a HHHC survey last week on a campus where just within the last few months for their counseling center, they had a session on the healthcare needs of Asian students. That's the kind of thing that we could offer then to faculty and staff to go to a department meeting and give a 15-minute presentation on what sort of things have we learned in our interactions with students from our three main countries on this campus, and how do you access us when you need help with a student. And so using our own internal resources and our own experience to try to help the faculty, I think, is a way that we could engage.
And this is always when they come to us, so I don't get to interact with the students that aren't coming to the health center, but asking them for cultural competency questions is really helpful. I mean, if you ask the student about their country or about some of their cultures, they're always more than willing to talk to you about it and are actually usually fairly excited that someone asked and was interested in that sort of thing. And so I usually, especially if it's from a country that we don't usually see, but even a lot of our Indian students, because it's very different where they come from in India as to what some of the cultures and traditions are and how they've viewed medical care and what they've had. And so just having a conversation with them to talk about those things kind of help, as they feel more welcome to come back, and then, we kind of develop that relationship from there. So, Devin?
All right, another question. We have two more also came in. But do case managers help students with anything other than insurance-related questions?
Repeat, other than?
So do case managers help students with anything other than insurance-related questions? I'm assuming like navigators
yes.
or...
Yeah. In fact, I think our case managers helping with insurance is probably way down the list of the things that they help with, and they will often defer on those things to our insurance office people who've spent a lot of time working with international students. But case managers help with everything that a licensed clinical social worker would help with who's working in a county government setting, and so whether that's accessing care or accessing food or accessing shelter or working with the university for accommodations, working with the university to disenroll for a period of time. And having a student leave the university who's an international student is a very complicated issue, and you have to really think it carefully through. It's something that would be difficult for a student to navigate. It can have impacts on whether or not that student's health insurance continues beyond what might be a continuation plan period of time. How do you negotiate those things? So I have felt over the years that we have had case managers that there isn't anything that you can't take to them, that they can't figure out how in some way to resource some other area and make it better and help. Yeah, my answer is, wow, yes, lots of things.
I wanted to add too that for our case managers on the payer side, they do help quite a bit with navigating the benefits and talking about in-network and out-of-network and things like that. And but one of the things that we're doing actually as we speak is, and Aetna is doing this across the board. When we have a natural disaster event, like we're having Hurricane Michael right now, we are able to identify through our data students that have had procedures or that are what we consider high risk, so individuals that are on dialysis or receiving chemotherapy or high-risk pregnancies, and our case managers are reaching out to them to make sure that they have what they need, that they're safe, that they're okay, and that to let them know that the medical care doesn't have to stop because they have to evacuate, and they'll make sure that they're getting linked in with the services wherever they end up being, these services that are vital to them during the time that they're away from their home or their school.
Another question was, with the challenge we have to help international students accept mental health care, how can we normalize imperfect academic performance or speak up to grad advisors?
I was thinking about that when we heard about the 4 pillars this morning, because I knew I was going to be on this international student panel, that accepting failure, one of the pillars, is a very difficult thing in many of the countries that our international students will come from. And I think that if we're going to, it takes a lot of resiliency to be an international student. I studied abroad for a year. It was back when you went for a year. And I went to Scotland where they almost spoke English. And I went through really a lot of culture shock and what they called the U-shaped curve, being absolutely ecstatic when you arrive about how wonderful it is to be in the United States, or in my case, Scotland. And then all the realities start to come in. You don't understand the educational system. You're not communicating properly with your instructors. You're having trouble making friends. And it just, you bottom out. And that bottom out often is around the holidays in that year, and you can't go home. And there you are in a country, you've had trouble making friends. So that ability to deal with failure, ability to make relationships with faculty, it's like all 4 of the pillars. I thought, this is going to be much harder if you're an international student. And so I think we need to take those things to heart. Maybe it's time for ACHA to put together a task force on best practices in providing health and well-being services to international students on our campuses, and try to get the collective wisdom of all of you and our colleagues across the country and see what we can come up with as individual best practices. And that's probably a document that will be really challenging to put together. We haven't shied away from those. We have a gun violence task force right now. That's a tough one. But I think that could be a role that ACHA could help with.
So we have reached the end of our time, so I want to thank everyone for being here today, and hopefully this panel has provided some insight. It looks like lunch is ready, so we are going to have everyone grab lunch, and then we will begin the next session shortly. Thank you.